Welcome to our panel discussion today. Our guests are Harry Bezwadi, the CIO of the Army Program Executive Office, Enterprise Information Systems, Todd Scharf, the Chief Information Security Officer and the Associate Director of the Office of Information Technology at the Security and Exchange Commission, Chris Kinahan, the Treasury Department's Director of the Security Operations Center, and Aubrey Merchant, Security Director at Blue Coat. Gentlemen, welcome to the panel. This should be a great conversation. Before we get started, let me set some context for our discussion today. The federal threat landscape is changing. It's different today than it's ever been before, and it's going to continue to change. The cyber attacks and threats against federal networks used to be all about, remember, Code Red, the love virus. Those are the good old days, weren't they? Those are easy days. But now we talk more about the advanced persistent threat. We talk about zero-day attacks. And of course, it's all about securing the data, not really the systems, but the data. And that makes defending networks much harder. Add to the mix cloud, mobile computing, and the federal technology environment is more complex than ever before and in many respects more difficult to defend. A recent ISC Squared survey of public and private sector security officials from September found application vulnerabilities were the top-rated threat to the security enterprise. 72% of the executives rated it as their chief concern. Similarly, 70% of the executives rated mobile devices as their top threat to their organizations, but many reported they had not successfully implemented mobile security policies or programs. The vast majority of the executives, about 77% in government and 63% in the private industry, believe they have too few people on their IT security staffs, yet 61% cited business conditions as an obstacle preventing them from hiring more personnel. So, how do you deal with all this? How do you, as an agency or organization, protect your data, your networks, your systems? That's what we're going to explore today. We'll address things as risk management, continuous monitoring, and moving away from just focusing on attack signatures and potentially looking at categories of attacks to understand how best to defend and mitigate intrusions. So with that context, let's get started. Again, Harry Bezwadi is the CIO of the Army PEO EIS. Todd Scharf is the CISO and the Associate Director of Information Technology at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Aubrey Merchant is the Security Director of Blue Coat, and Chris Kinahan is the Treasury Department's Director of the Security Operations Center. Let me start with Harry. You come from a different perspective than maybe everybody else on the panel. You come from an acquisition perspective in many ways, and you get to be the CIO of the PEO EIS. Give us about 30 seconds of what PEO EIS does, just in case if people aren't familiar, and then how do you view the federal landscape from cybersecurity threats today?
So PEO EIS is the material solution developer for the Army. Especially in dealing with commercial off-the-shelf technologies. And then our customers are increasingly facing, like you just talked about, the advanced persistent threats. But the new ones are such as advanced volatile threats, as well as the biggest challenge also is real-time correlation of the continuous insight into our custom analytics across structured and unstructured data. And because we collect a lot of data because we deploy things, and how do you deal with it? How do you get the intelligence back to our customers so they can take right action in defending against the threats?
And when you talk about the data, are you looking at it just from a procurement perspective, or are you looking at it from a more typical cybersecurity perspective? Because even though PEO EIS deals a lot with with acquisition. So
we do both. So if we're looking at the programs themselves, we do a lot of ERP systems that run the business of Army. What we have done is we're the first organization to deploy the tools that actually have code efficiency, as well as the information assurance controls that we can see the threats inside the code, when people may leave SQL injection errors and other things in there that we would like to clean up. So we have made a policy, Ms. Watson, who's the DAA for our organization, is the first one to implement across the board policy that said you will use these to clean up the code itself. The second side is we also are responsible for deploying the network across 202 Army bases. So as part of that transport, and also some of the data centers we run on behalf of the Army, we had to make sure the data is secure. So we're now trying to look at application security as well.
All right. So a couple of things that definitely we're going to follow up with you about. The policy around the code secure is going to be fascinating. Let me move to Aubrey from Blue Coat. What are you seeing from the federal landscape, from your customers, from your clients? How is it different today than maybe in previous years?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing in our market is that folks are discovering that they really are lacking a lot of visibility into what's going in and out of their network. So, there's a lot of perimeter defenses that we are, mandated to utilize, like next generation firewalls, proxy servers, intrusion prevention systems. But the matter of fact is, we're just not seeing everything that's happening on the network. So without having that complete visibility, you can't really have any context into what's happening on the network. So at Blue Coat, what we're doing is providing a framework to be able to provide that deep level of visibility all the way down to being able to inspect what's happening within SSL traffic so that we can give our customers that complete context.
I want to go back to that perimeter defense issue for a second with you, because I was doing some research for the panel, and Ray Wagner, who's a managing vice president at Gartner's Secure Business and Enablement Group, it's a great title, I think, talked about recently at a conference, talked about the use of cloud services, especially outside the control of the IT department, means antivirus and perimeter firewalls are increasingly ineffective. I thought that was a fascinating standpoint. Is that what you're seeing as people move to cloud? It's a different type of security that's needed to deal with this different threat?
So, well, when we think about what it is that Blue Coat's been providing traditionally, it's really been more of a client-server sort of, secure environment. And when you bring into play cloud computing, what you're really talking now is about bringing, disparate data sources into the cloud itself. So this now web server is actually just a front-end database server, if you will, for a number of disparate database sources. So being able to secure the data as it's in transit, or make sure that the data integrity is not breached before it actually reaches the client is something that we're certainly working on, and something that we're seeing a lot of requirements for.
I think data in transit is going to be the next big thing in terms of people know they need to do it, but now how do you do it the best? Right. Which, let's move to Todd, and Todd can tell us about the SEC's goals and challenges with the kind of the modern threat landscape.
Some of the major challenges we have, actually we've overcome quite a bit in the past couple of years. Still, I think that our biggest threat is the insider threat, and that's not from an intentional standpoint. It's really from just people get to be complacent. They're dealing with the same thing, same data every day. That want to do the job right, do it efficiently, quickly, and sometimes there's a bit of complacency. The biggest thing is keeping the attention there, and the awareness and training aspect of it. And regardless of what technology we put in place, if the users have to have access to the data, and if they're not aware of the sensitivity and the value of the data, then that's when we get in trouble.
You talk about training as one of the most important pieces, and that's probably something we'll get to as well, because I think the insider threat is something that people recognize. At the same time, sequestration, budget cuts, is that taking a hit, or are you able to kind of carve off that piece for cyber training and protect it in some way?
We actually at the SEC, they fund security pretty well, and the sequestration and the furloughs really didn't have any impact on us.
Because so much is user fees.
Some of it's user fees, but we have a good financial management office that really made sure that we were able to tough it through some of the strenuous times.
All right, well, that's good news for both the SEC employees and the people of the data you hold. Let's move to Chris over at the Treasury Department. Now, you get a little bit of what Todd does with the financial side. You get a little bit what Harry does with the running systems. What's from security operations? Where do you see the biggest threats, and how are you dealing with them?
So to us, one of the biggest threats is the fact that the threat itself changes so dynamically and so quickly that going with traditional security approaches of deploying commercial tools and our best practices, we can't keep up with the changing nature of the threat. And so one of the things that we've had to do is build into our processes the ability to adapt quickly on the fly, to be able to use custom tools or open source tools based on how we see the threat is changing, and then eventually supplement those with commercial tools once they catch up to being able to fill that gap. That in combination with things like bring your own device really, change the way that security operations has been thought of in the past.
So you're using a combination of tools. When you say the threat changes, Give me a sense of what that means. Meaning today it's an attack against a port, and tomorrow it's a phishing attack, a spear phishing attack, or is it even more complicated than that?
It's like that and more. So we'll see threats on one day sitting there saying, "Hey, I'm going to go after a PDF vulnerability that's well known," and then the next day it's a 0-day attack against a Word document or something like that, and then it becomes something that's more topical in terms of, okay, hey, we I don't know, there's something in the news happens, and then there's a bunch of spear phishing directed at that, which may not be attachment based, it may be a malicious link or something along those lines. Combine that with the fact that they compromise known good sites. So in the old world, it would be they stand up a fake site, and you'd be able to sit there and say, okay, I can block that. I don't have to worry about that anymore once I've identified it. Nowadays they know where our users are going. They know everyone's activities, and so they target things that we would normally go to. Say the Washington Post, or Federal News
Radio, of course.
Federal
yes.
News Radio's
yes.
website.
Don't forget about us.
Things like that where, when from a traditional security detection standpoint, if we're looking through traffic, we sit there and say, hey, this looks normal. This is what people normally do on a day-to-day basis.
Todd, you were kind of shaking your head a little bit when Chris was saying, are you guys seeing the very similar things in terms of the changing nature of the threat, and then how are you guys able to kind of change with that changing nature?
Yeah, Chris was exactly right. You're seeing new threats are coming out every day. And to deal with those, you've got to attack them at the entry points and be able to be flexible in your analysis and your mitigating controls that you're putting in place. A lot of times, Chris was mentioning the 0-day attacks. You can't readily mitigate internally right away. There may be a patch coming out eventually that you can apply, but in the meantime, you've got to buy yourself some time to properly test that so you don't create more disruption in your environment. So understanding your traffic patterns and where people are going, what's essential systems they need access to, and really putting those protections at the gateways is where you get the most benefit right off the bat.
You said protections at the gateways, entry points. My favorite example is obviously the trusted internet connection. I have a soft spot for OMB cybersecurity mandates, and like you all probably do. But let me turn to Aubrey so no one gets put on the spot, since you can talk about that. Are agencies doing a better job of stopping it at the gates? There's a great movie, Enemy at the Gates. I don't know if you remember that from the 90s about a World War II battle. But anyways.
I do. I'm not that young. So.
Do you have a sense that, people are doing a better job of stopping it before they actually get into the system?
So I would say that my sense of kind of where we are right now is that we've gotten really good at passing audits, but we haven't really gotten very good at discovering what's actually going on in our network. And as I led with, what we need to be able to do that is to have better visibility. And I think that the point that you made about looking at various traffic patterns and accessing, the metadata or attributes, if you will, about what's actually going on in your network is really going to be very critical for us to be able to get the type of attribution that we need to be able to see these things that are malicious.
And it's the attribution piece that's always the hardest, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing where it's coming from and what the problem is, or who's perpetuating the problem.
Right.
I think that's still the part of
it's a hard problem.
Yes, and it's not easily solved, I don't think either. So Harry, let me go over to you before we have to take a quick break. Give me a sense from your perspective. What are you seeing from the changing threats? Very similar to what Chris was saying about how they're changing every day. You got to be agile and nimble. Are you guys able to do that from both an acquisition perspective, but also from a service? Because in many ways, you're serving other people in the Army.
Yeah, so we have decided to take a quite a different outlook. First is that we wanted to provide a deployable, deploying a defensible architecture. We have currently over 435 security stacks. There's no way to keep them at the same best of breed levels and try to protect those things. We're only as good as our weakest link. So we decided that we're going to reduce them to 11 regional stacks in corners from 435. That's quite dramatic. We even got the funding for that from OMB and congressional guys, so are actually able to help us with that. The next thing is we would like to have a common picture, common operating picture, so that we want to use common tools. Our partners at DISA, who's responsible for wide area network, and we are responsible for protecting our networks. We would like to make sure we use common tools so they can see what's happening at the down below, and we can see up channel what's happening, and so we can stay together. The other thing is we're increasing dramatically the bandwidth. We're going from some places 1 gig to 10 gig to 100 gig nodes. The reason for that is today, just an example at Fort Belvoir, we have over 1,500 circuits people who had the money and others, they went ahead and bought their own circuits to get the faster, quicker response to them. Well, those to us is attack surfaces we would like to shut them down. The only way to do that is build capacity where they don't have to look up some other ways, and we can actually provide them and collapse them onto the 100 gig nodes and give them a faster, quicker response thing. And the last thing is command control function, centralizing the command control function and increasing the capacity to take action when authorized. So we're assisting Army Cyber to create a command structure between Army Cyber and U.S. Cyber Command, even with our partners with NSA. So not only we can look at what the problem of the penetrations are, we can actually potentially even take offensive capability to mitigate that threat. That's one unique thing that we have, other than maybe our partners at SEC and others may not have.
Very interesting. 435 security stacks, going to take them down to 11 regional ones. Maybe we'll come back after break and talk a little bit more about that. But we're going to take a break. You're listening to a panel discussion, The Modern Federal Threat Landscape, sponsored by Blue Coat on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.